Do you have a Weber Smokey Mountain and you struggle to use it? Or maybe you're in the market for your first smoker and you're wondering if it's the right smoker for you. Well, I've got you covered because I'm going to do a deep dive on this smoker and why I recommend it to everyone as their first smoker. When people ask me what they should get for their first smoker,
Which one? Which one? Which one?
I usually start off with two questions. One, do you want to jump head first into this hobby, struggle with fire management with a smoker that's less forgiving? Then you're going to want a stick burner. Do you want to be able to put your meat on the smoker, set it and forget it, and then skip back into the house with your headset on and play Call of Duty? Then you need a pellet smoker.
It fucking sucks! Trash! Trash!
But if someone tells me they have no idea what they want, I recommend the Weber Smokey Mountain.
What the hell is even that?
My recommendation for the Weber Smokey Mountain comes down to a few reasons: cost, ease of use, versatility, and the learning curve. So first, let's talk cost.
I'm broke as shit.
Brand new, these can run anywhere from $200 to $500. But to be honest, you can always get on Facebook Marketplace and find these things for a fraction of the cost. There's always some sucker out there and they thought smoking meat was going to be their next big hobby. They realized it's more work than they wanted.
I fucked up.
And then they end up selling it on Facebook Marketplace for a fraction of the cost. These come in a 14-inch, 18-inch, and a 22-inch. This particular one is the largest they make at 22 inches. It retails for $500 and I paid $200. So if you're gonna get one, get on Facebook Marketplace and look. As far as the ease of use on this smoker, I'd put it right between a stick burner or an offset smoker and a pellet smoker. The reason I say that is because in the beginning, you are going to deal with fire management and getting those temperatures down or up, which teaches you some of that fire management skill that you're going to need if you ever go up to a stick burner. Once you have those temperatures stable, this is really a set it and forget it smoker.
Forget about it.
I've been able to start this thing at midnight, get the temperature stable, and it's smooth sailing for 5 or 6 hours. Now, as far as the versatility, this thing is amazing. You can smoke anything you want. You can smoke brisket, you can smoke pulled pork, whatever, but it also breaks down and you can use it as a grill. Now, the biggest reason that I'm going to recommend this smoker to a beginner is the learning curve. This thing allows you to cook some really phenomenal meals while learning fire management. Fire management is the most important part of smoking. It doesn't matter what smoker you have, it doesn't matter the wood you use, it doesn't matter what you're cooking. If your temperatures aren't consistent and you aren't able to manage your fire, it doesn't matter what smoker you buy. But this thing here is way more forgiving than a stick burner, but it allows you to pick up more skills than a pellet smoker is going to allow you to. And the learning curve to me is the most important part when considering a smoker, because if you dive headfirst into a stick burner and you struggle and you really can't figure it out, you're more likely to quit.
I quit!
But it offers enough of a challenge to where you can still feel like you're learning something while still cooking great food. And if you bought a stick burner for what you're going to spend on this thing, you're going to have a hell of a time trying to stabilize temperatures. You're going to end up with a 1/16 inch steel at best.
Fucking thing sucks.
Those are the 4 reasons that I recommend the Weber Smokey Mountain as your first smoker. Now that I've given you what probably seems like a sales pitch,
Well, reason for the call today, John, is
let's actually get to know this smoker a little bit. I have it broken down here into all of its components and we'll talk a little bit about every piece. All right, so let's start with the bottom of the smoker and we'll work our way up. So on the bottom here, this is going to be called the heat shield. This is obviously used to protect surfaces that you don't want damaged. So if you're using this on a deck, I recommend keeping it on here. Inside of here, we're gonna have the charcoal chamber. Now this is the ring. Make sure to leave this in here when you put the charcoal in. It's gonna help contain those charcoals to the center of the chamber. Here you're gonna have your charcoal grate. I have seen people try to remove this and use it without it. I don't recommend it because it is gonna cut down on your burn rate for your charcoal. Next, you're gonna notice that we have these flow vents here. Now you're gonna have 3 of these total, 1 on each side. This is really where a lot of your fire management is going to come into play. If you want your temperatures as high as they can possibly get, you're going to open these wide open. That's going to allow air to flow into the smoker and increase those temperatures. Now above the charcoal chamber is going to be the water pan. This sits in the cooking chamber actually. Now the water pan's a major feature of the Weber Smokey Mountain. It's what makes it what it is. And I can promise you this thing's going to get dirty as hell. I usually put foil over top, but even then juices are going to get underneath the foil, but it does make for easier cleanup. So the water pan probably causes the most confusion with the Weber Smokey Mountain because people aren't sure if they need to use it, if they need to put water in it, or what they even need to do with it.
I don't know where I am. I can't breathe.
So I can tell you there's 2 purposes to the water pan. The first purpose is going to be heat regulation. It's going to absorb the heat from underneath and it's going to regulate that heat. and then it's going to stabilize the temperatures within the smoker. I find that if I'm trying to smoke at lower temperatures, I'm going to be using the water pan with water in it. Second purpose of the water pan is to add moisture to the cooking environment. There is science to back up the fact that having moisture in the smoker does help smoke stick to the meat. I always cook with this in the smoker. Whether you put water in the pan or not is really up to you, but it's going to be determined by how high of a temperature you need to cook at or how low of a temperature you need to cook at. All right, so next is going to be the cooking chamber. This is the middle section of the smoker. This is going to be the piece that you hate to move around the most. This middle section houses the water pan at the bottom, and then it's going to have both of your cooking grates. And I haven't noticed personally much of a difference in temperature from the bottom and the top. Biggest feature to note on the cooking chamber is going to be this door here. You're going to use this door to add charcoal to the smoker as you're starting to run out, or you can add water to the pan as you need it. I personally don't add water to the pan after I've started using it because I've had mishaps where I've dropped water into the charcoal. So I tend not to do that. If you do, just be super careful. So while this door is nice, when you open it and you leverage it, it can fall. Ideally, it would stay. Yep. See? So ideally, yeah, fuck this door. Ideally, it would stay like that and you could put charcoal in it. These things always fall. So just note that when you go to put charcoal in. So the last component we're going to talk about on this smoker is the lid. So the first thing I'll say about this lid is this here
Sucks!
don't use it. It never ever reads the temperature correctly. It might when you first get it, but this will inevitably be wrong all the time. And I've never seen a Weber Smokey Mountain where this thermometer here is accurate. They do make some really good replacements that you can put on here. This is one piece that I really wish they would upgrade. But for what you spend on the smoker, I mean, what can you expect? I've gotten to the point where I can actually touch the top of this and I'll be within 10 or 15 degrees on what I think the temperature is. So if you're a beginner or an off chance you haven't maxed out your smoking attribute ability, like myself, then just use a thermometer on the grates. That's what I'll do if I want to sit it and forget it. Next up is going to be this vent here. I've noticed when I close this off and there's water in the pan, a lot of those vapors are going to build up on the top of this and then fall down onto it, almost like you would in a stock pot when it meets braising, and you don't want that really happening. So next up, we're going to talk charcoal. And I don't mean the type of charcoal you use. Honestly, I just use the Kingsford. I know a lot of people say you should use lump charcoal. That's fine. If you want to spend the extra money on lump charcoal, that's perfectly fine. I've used both and I don't notice a difference in the taste. As long as you're not putting lighter fluid on your charcoal and you're not buying charcoal that's infused with lighter fluid, you're fine. So aside from the water pan, charcoal method tends to be the other most confusing part about using the Weber Smokey Mountain. There's so many different techniques out there. It can become very confusing for people.
I'm extremely confused.
Especially if you're learning and you have no clue what some of this terminology is. I'm going to talk about just a few methods. And if you know these few methods, you don't really need to know any other method. And there's really only one method that I use, which I'll go over last, and then I'll demonstrate how to do that method. So the first charcoal method we're going to talk about, you won't have seen implemented very often. And it's called the bottom up method. Now this method is really something you see more with wood burning, where you light the wood on the bottom and then you build on top of that. So essentially, anything in this chimney, we're going to consider this lit charcoal. We're going to lay this lit charcoal down. So this charcoal is lit, theoretically. So with the lit charcoal in, we're going to take our wood. I usually just use leftover chunks from my stick burner. They work great. These are pecan. I also like to just buy this brand here if I don't have any left over, but that's going to smoke. Next thing you'll do is you'll take unlit charcoal. You'll just pour it right on top. Now you would probably use more charcoal than this if you're cooking for very long, but just to demonstrate the process, you'll evenly spread this out. Once this stops smoking, you're ready to throw the cooking chamber on with the water pan and then the lid. You're not going to see this technique implemented very often, so you can give it a try. Like I said, you're not going to see it very often. The second method that I'm going to talk about, and the one that you're probably going to hear a lot about, is the fuse method. It's better known as the snake method. But essentially what you're going to do is you're going to create a ring of charcoal, leaving the center open so you can light one side of the ring, then it will gradually burn down. This method looks really cool. A lot of people might use it just because it looks good, but I will tell you that this does tend to burn for a really long time at very low temperatures. So if you're trying to go for the longest smoke possible, I recommend the snake method. Now you can make this look as fancy as you want, but essentially all it is creating a ring of charcoal. All right, so I've got that set up. I'll preface this by telling you that this is not the method that I use very often. I may have used it a couple times, and the one drawback to it is it takes too long to set up. Try to keep the ring as consistent as possible, because if you have spots where it's sporadic and you have more charcoal, less charcoal, you're going to have more variation in heat throughout the cook. So if you got a bunch of charcoal here and a little bit of charcoal here, it's not going to burn as hot here as it does here. Now, say you want to light this end of the ring, what you're going to do is you're going to take the wood and you're actually going to stack it up pretty early in the cook. And you'll do that because that's when your smoke flavor is going to be imparted the most, right? So you'll want to use these pretty early on. And that's pretty much it. You'll light that and, you know, you'll get a pretty good cook out of it. I recommend maybe doing a little bit more charcoal throughout, keeping these closer together so that you can get a consistent burn throughout the whole thing. That's probably the biggest thing to pay attention to, is making sure that this charcoal is consistent all the way around. So the last method we're going to talk about is a very popular method. It might be the most popular method for lighting charcoal, at least as it pertains to the Weber Smokey Mountain. And that's called the Minion method. Now the Minion method is really simple, but when I was researching it, when I was first getting into this, I found it confusing because there's a couple of different ways that people do it, and you're going to see that as you're searching. I'll break down 2 techniques that you can use to use the Minion method. There's probably more out there, and there's all kinds of variations. So just use what you like and what works for you the best. But essentially, the first method is you're gonna have a can like this. This was like a can of beans or something. I cut the bottom out. You'll pretty much set this here, right? You're gonna take your charcoal and you're gonna pour it around the can. Now this is unlit charcoal. So you're gonna pretty much make sure this is even, right? I would normally use more than this, but just for the demonstration purposes, assume this can's about halfway up here, right? You would want that much charcoal in here. Next, what you're gonna do is you're gonna have enough lit charcoal in this chimney starter to fill this can up, right? If you have a little more, that's fine. It'll overflow a little bit. As long as you get most of it in there, you can then either use the gloves or get some tongs and you'll pull this up, and the lit charcoal will be in the center and around the top here a little bit. And then that's gonna gradually burn. And then you can toss your wood on there anywhere you want. And boom, it's that simple. I'll show you the other technique for doing the Minion method, but this is my go-to method here. It's really quick, it does the job. I've gotten at least 5 to 6 hours of burn time with the charcoal when I do it this way. Second technique is, let's assume that this is all unlit charcoal, right? I'm then gonna take this chimney starter and I'll fill it about halfway to 3/4 of the way up, depending on how hot I want that initial temperature. If you don't want it that hot, then fill it a little less than halfway up. So let's say I've lit this charcoal. What I'm gonna do is, once this charcoal has stopped smoking and it's properly lit, I'm gonna pour it on top of this unlit charcoal. I'm gonna do my best to get this dispersed as evenly as possible. But then I can throw my wood on here. And really the biggest difference is you're not using a can or something to put your coals in the middle. You're just kind of putting them on top. And I get really good burn rates with this. It's the quickest setup possible. And if you're just getting started, before you jump into those other methods, I recommend doing the Minion method this way. And then you can slowly experiment with stuff. These are just some of the most common. If you're getting started, these are the basics that you really need to know, especially when it comes to charcoal methods. And so using the Minion method, we're gonna get this thing lit, and then I'm gonna kind of walk you through the process that I use to kind of get the temperature stable and where I want it. I'm gonna fill this about halfway up, and now I'm gonna light it. Probably the best way to get this thing lit is use one of these tumbleweeds. They do wax cubes. Do something like this. You're gonna avoid using lighter fluid. You can use paper, you can use part of the charcoal bag. I've seen people use butcher paper. For me, this is the quickest, easiest way. All right, so I got this thing lit. I'm gonna toss it underneath here. Now what'll happen is that's gonna light the bottom of those charcoals. And what I'm looking for is I'm looking for no smoke coming from these charcoals. They're gonna be white. So as you can see, this is burning really well. I don't have any smoke coming from it, and that means I can throw it on top of this unlit charcoal. Now make sure that you have all of these vents open. We want them wide open. because we want as much airflow as possible in the beginning. So we're gonna put this on as evenly as possible. Now, if you don't get it on there even, just get a pair of tongs and move it around. But at this point, I'll go ahead and throw the wood on, and I'm gonna let it burn down just a little bit, because if I throw the top on it right now, it's probably gonna choke it just a little bit. So while we let that charcoal and wood burn for a few minutes, we're gonna go ahead and get the cooking chamber ready. I'll go ahead and put this in the cooking chamber. Once it's in there, then I'll put water in it. Handling it with water in it is a lot more difficult, so just put the water in it after you put it in the cooking chamber. For this demonstration, I'm not gonna fill it up because I'm just gonna break this thing down when I'm done. But I would normally fill this thing about halfway up with water, maybe a little more depending on the temperature I want. I'm gonna attempt to get this temperature to 250 to 275 without the water in it. It will be a little more difficult, but it is doable. Next, you wanna put the bottom grate in. Lastly, we'll put the top grate on. Okay, so this is burned down pretty good. I've got quite a bit of the charcoal lit. I'm gonna go ahead and throw this cooking chamber on. Now you will notice that when you throw this on and then you put the lid on, it's gonna smoke a lot more. Eventually that white smoke's gonna dissipate. This is probably where you're also gonna start hearing that water sizzle in the bottom of this. Okay, so it's at this point that I'm gonna recommend putting the lid on. And also, don't stand right over top of that. If you think cutting an onion's bad,
He's a pussy.
you're gonna see it smoke a lot more when this is on there. As those charcoals are choked down a little bit, it's gonna bring that temperature down, but you're also gonna see this smoke dissipate. And it's gonna be pretty clean coming out of there. My recommendation at this point is just to be patient, but please allow the smoke to die down. And sometimes if I feel like the temperature is jumping and spiking too fast, I'll actually cut down on the vents, cut those back to about halfway. So I'm noticing that the smoke is slowing down a lot, which is perfect. Now what I'm gonna go ahead and do is probably shut off 2 of the air vents on the bottom. The reason I'm gonna do that is because I know that without running water in this thing, that I'm probably gonna end up shutting all of them off except one, and it's gonna be open about a 1/4 inch. And that's just based off experience. But it is gonna run a lot hotter if you don't have water in it. Now, when you adjust those vents, you might start to see a little bit of smoke. That's okay. Anytime you choke a fire down, you will tend to see a little bit more smoke. It just happens. So right now, I only have one vent on the bottom open, and it's only open a 1/4 inch. So this really, to me, is the fun part about using this thing. It's the part that teaches you fire management. But these little fine tunings and these little things that you're gonna learn that works for you, which is what makes smoking food and cooking with fire such a fun hobby, because your experiences can be very different than someone else. So I'll learn little things. So I've noticed the top vent here, if I put it, I wanna try turning this without lifting it. If I put it opposite of that door, my meat will actually get a better smoke flavor. And the reason I believe that is because if this vent is on the same side as that door, a lot of my smoke will probably escape through one side of the smoker. By doing it like this, the smoke goes up, some will escape here, but it will also draw some of that smoke to this side, essentially pulling it over top of that meat. And that's the kind of stuff you're gonna learn by doing this yourself.
Just do it!
At this point, I'm gonna go ahead and shut this top vent about halfway, because like I said, I'm gonna have to be really diligent at trying to control the fire when there's no water in that pan. So I'm gonna shut that about halfway. All right, so I'm noticing that the smoke cleared out a lot. At this point, if the temperature is where you want it, you could go ahead and throw some food on. But I can go ahead and tell you we're over 300, which is normal with these Weber Smokey Mountains. When you first start them and you haven't put water in there, that's gonna happen. Now we're gonna see if I'm right, but I know we're just over 300 on this. Yeah, it looks like I was right. We're at about 302. So what I'll probably do is the bottom vent over here, I'm gonna probably cut it down just a little more. Okay, so at this point, we're right at about 280. We'll go ahead and check. Now that method of touching this and trying that comes with experience. My hands are obviously gonna have more or less sensitivity to heat than yours.
Nobody's impressed. No one cares.
But if you do that constantly and you're checking the temperature, it probably won't take you that many cooks to figure out, what that is. Yep. We're sitting exactly at about 285. At this point, if I'm cooking at 275, I'm gonna go ahead and throw whatever I'm cooking on this thing. And you can see that this fire is stabilized because it's not smoking anymore. That means that it's burning efficiently. And at this point, I shouldn't have to adjust any of these vents until I get later in the cook and I'm starting to lose fuel. And then I might wanna open up some of the vents. So without putting water in that pan, you can see that these temperatures do run a lot hotter than they're going to if you put water in there. If I had water in there, we're probably looking at more of a 225 to 250 range. But yeah, that's as simple as that. We're at a 275 now. So that method right there has got you set. So now at this point, you can still put that headset on and go play Madden, Call of Duty, whatever you want to do. And this thing's good for the next 5 hours at least. So I'm gonna end the video with a couple pitfalls that most people have when using this thing. It's usually due to human error. First thing that people do is they fill the charcoal chamber up with way too much charcoal. If the charcoal's touching the water pan, you got too much fucking charcoal. So go ahead and cut back on that. You don't need that much charcoal. And you're never gonna get 12 hours out of a Weber Smokey Mountain. If you might at a super low temperature, but it's gonna be like smoking a piece of cheese or something. It's gonna be difficult. I know there's gonna be people say they have. You fill this thing up with too much charcoal and you're gonna have fire management problems. The second pitfall that most people make, and I've made this mistake, especially when I first started out, is the temperature on this thing would get really hot. So I would try to remove this lid. In doing so, I introduced way more oxygen to the fire and the temperature spikes. So yeah, your thermometer for the next 30 seconds is gonna be lower, but you fucked up because you done brought the temperature up. So don't do that. Use the vents to manage the fire. Don't take this lid off in order to bring the temperature down. That's not a good idea because you're gonna introduce more oxygen. Third pitfall is that people don't clean the water pan. That's usually just due to being lazy. I know because when I started and I forgot to put foil in the pan, it's a mess.
Look at the mess in here.
You can and you are gonna have grease fires if you let that thing just accumulate grease all the time. So those are all the pitfalls that I'm gonna talk about today. The rest I'm gonna let you discover as Easter eggs.
You gotta be kidding me.
That's really part of the process, learning to smoke and learning to cook with fire. It's really that simple. You know, don't overthink it. If there's one thing that you should learn about cooking with fire, it's that great barbecue is born from experience, and experience is born from bad barbecue. You're not gonna get that great barbecue if you've never cooked bad barbecue. Just understand that and know that this stuff comes with time and it comes with experience. So if you like the information I'm giving you, the tips, I got more coming your way. I normally use an offset smoker, so I got some tips and tricks for that as well, and a ton of other equipment that you can use. I've got a lot of cool things I'm gonna be doing. So if you like the channel, go ahead and like the video, share, and subscribe.